right. So this portion of our study was all about learning about what the infused classroom is and what the infused student is. And there was a lot of really, really good, meaty stuff in here that hopefully caused you to think and reflect about your own practice. So with that being said, we'll start out. I'm going to throw this question out to you, and just share out your thoughts. So the chapter on the infused classroom gave us the opportunity to focus and reflect on our own teaching and learning mindset. What parts of this chapter challenged your thinking and your practice? The infused classroom. What challenged your thinking and your practice?
I'll go. Really on page 41, making thinking and learning visible. I didn't know that Project Zero existed, and all those thinking short, easy routines were like crazy, and I went over a ton of them. I just kind of stopped reading the chapter at that moment and just kind of went through Project Zero and started picking things out. And I've got that. All my tabs are open for that, so I can look through those. But that was kind of crazy. There's like maybe 3 of those things I kind of do. Maybe 1 on a regular basis, but I love the idea of finding those routines and then building off those throughout the year and making them more meaningful. That was like crazy to me. I thought that was really cool. I thought the book study was worth that to me.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. When I think of the visible thinking routines, kind of relates almost to the other book study that we're doing on the EDU protocols, where that is more of like an instructional framework where, just lesson frames, you add in the content to the frame. These are great, for student thinking and helping students think about the metacognition aspect of it. And so they relate to me, to each other, in that they're both, learning frames and thinking frames. So yeah, I love Project Zero and all of the different variations of thinking routines that are there. And like you said, Arthur, there's some of them that we're already doing without realizing it. Being able to branch off of that, and I love the way that it's organized too. It's structured in a way that is really beneficial and fits and helps to kind of organize, whatever lesson that you're teaching, and the type of conversations that you're having or that you would like to have. It's I love the way they have it structured. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. What else?
I'm not sure where this was in the text. I was trying to go back and find it, but I didn't make a note apparently. There was a section that said if what you're doing on the Chromebook can be replaced with paper and pencil, then you're not using the Chromebook efficiently, basically. And I think that's maybe my problem a little bit in some areas, because I teach math, and so it's hard to find. I teach high school math, so it's good to find good quality Chromebook technology-based assignments for them to do that can't just be replaced with paper and pencil.
But I do want to say, Shelley, just piggybacking off of what you said, I think that don't be too hard on yourself, because I think there are times where that substitution is appropriate. And I don't think, is that going to be our best integration of technology? No, not necessarily. But I think that there can be times and places where that is appropriate. So don't be too hard on yourself, because that's why we have the SAM-R model, if you've ever heard of that, where substitution is the S. That is why it's a part of the model, because there are times that it's appropriate. So, but I understand what you're saying. It is hard with math. But yes, but reach out anytime, we can try to help you with thinking it through some ideas for that. So
I'll go. On page 39, it's like the very beginning of that chapter. I highlighted educators need to rethink the traditional model of delivering instruction and begin to make the journey toward a more student-centered learning environment where student voice is honored. And I just wrote out to the side, why, underline, is this not our norm? And I feel like I keep saying this at all these professional developments I go to, but I feel like we're standing on a ledge in education of like, we have to change what we're doing because the kids are different. And the world they're living in and working in is not the world of education 20 years ago. And so I just feel like that is a shift that we have got to start making. And stuff like what we're doing right now is a good step in the right direction. But that stood out to me because of that.
Yeah, I'm with you too. When we design lessons, when we are presenting new content to students, our first go-to is to have them reflect on prior knowledge. What background knowledge do you have on this, right? And so as we are thinking about our own teaching and how we teach in the classroom, what is our background knowledge? What is our prior experience? Well, that's how we grew up, the schooling that we had when we were kids. What did that look like? Well, a lot of times it's teachers up in the front of the room, lecture style. It's not much collaboration. At least that was my experience. And so those experiences, regardless of what we were taught in college or in our educational schooling, some of those prior experiences and background knowledge that comes out in our teaching, out of habit. It's what we know, it's what we grew up on, and so changing that is so integral because, like you said, Kylie, kids are different today. Kids learn differently. The generations that we have, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the things that connect with them are different from the things that connect with us. And so we've got to shift ourselves in order to make sure that we are meeting those needs of our students.
And I'll add to that too, because something that I think about as well, I totally agree, Kylie and Matt, with what you said, is also helping the student shift, because I feel like sometimes they have been, especially in the middle school and high school, they've gone through their educational years with the teacher being in the front of the classroom and sharing everything, and them not having that voice and choice and being empowered. So taking that time at the beginning of the year to help them see, hey, this classroom is going to be a shift from what you've been used to. And, just working through those small activities, small lessons, small strategies. It can be lots of different ways to help them see, hey, this is not going to be a sit and get. This is not going to be me up here rolling through a PowerPoint, or me doing the math problems and you copying them, or, whatever. But this is a collaborative classroom where we are all working together and we're learning from each other, and you get to create, you get to do, you are empowered to kind of drive your own learning. So I think it kind of has to go both ways, not only us shifting, but also working with our students to show them that they have to shift as well, and helping them see how much more that they do learn and how much more they are in control of their learning. And sorry, that was the fire truck. How much more they are able to produce and do and collaborate and all of that, to get them excited about their learning as well, and wanting to walk in to our classroom each and every day and say, I'm excited about going to Miss Mitchell's class, or I'm excited about going to Mr. Herbert's class, or whoever it is, because we get to do this and I get to decide what I'm learning and how I'm learning. So
to kind of piggyback off of that, the part that I had marked was on page 46, student driven. And it said they set their own learning goals, keep track of their learning journey, and understand which tools will help them effectively demonstrate their new knowledge. I think that I've tried really hard to give them some tools and to show them some things in class, but I have not really given my students the opportunity to pick which ways they want to use it, which tools they want to use. I might say, here's 2 to choose from, but I'm not letting them really have ownership of that. I'm still holding on to, me being in charge of that before I let them have that control. So I think just letting some of that go and having those panic moments that we're talking about where we panic a little bit and they panic a little bit, that struggle that they will work through and they'll come out better on the other end. So.
Absolutely, Kelly, absolutely. And panic is good. Both Shelley and Rachel wrote about in the chat about the panic. And we all panic as teachers, kids panic as students, but like Kelly said, that the struggle and the persevering and the figuring it out, both on our end and on the students' end is really important. It grows us as well as growing the students too.
And I think the culture, and I know that's kind of discussed a little bit in the Tequity section of the book, but just setting up and creating a culture that allows students to be vulnerable, and sets the expectation that the learning journey is a together thing. It's not just them on this journey. It's you and them, all of us together, learning together, trying out new things, failing, making mistakes, all of those things. Setting that expectation from the very beginning allows that panic to feel more, shared, across the entire class. And because of that creates more of a close-knit community, I love that what Elizabeth said about the question formulation technique, and that's discussed a little bit later on in the book. And so we will definitely have some more conversation about that. It's that really intrigued me too. On page 64 was mentioned. I know it's mentioned on page 58, number 2, the 10 ways to rethink the delivery model of instruction using the question formulation technique. Elizabeth, do you want to speak more to that? You can.
Sorry, had to unmute. Well, I just feel like this is something that I started doing a little bit more in my classroom this past year because I felt like the learning targets, although they're very valuable for planning, the students don't relate to that. Even when we put in student-friendly content and language, we can make them write them down in their notebooks and do all these things with them, but and they're good to refer to. Like, were you able to do this? But I think to really spark curiosity, especially in a science classroom for me, is to have that essential question. What happens when we do this? Or, what happens to the brightness of a light bulb when we change the arrangement of batteries? That kind of thing, to get them thinking about what to do. And, phrasing a question that way can already, if they've got some prior knowledge, like working with some of the AmSty materials and so on, they can already think, okay, if I have X number of batteries, how can I connect them? And that definitely, I feel, gets more buy-in and gets them thinking a little bit more than just saying, okay, today you're going to do this. That's my take on it.
Yeah. Phrasing those learning targets in a way that will prompt students to question and ask more questions about what they're learning to get them intrigued and curious. Yeah, I think that is really important. It's not just a statement up on the board that they're supposed to know. It's they're supposed to know to recite it when an administrator walks in the room. It's got meaning to it. When we set it up and word it the right way to prompt further questioning.
And I think about those learning targets, like at the end of class, a lot of times we would say, how do you feel about this learning target, 1 through 5? And it was just a statement that they just gave you a 1 through 5 kind of thing. But as an essential question where, like Elizabeth, like you said, what happens when, then that gives them at the end of class or the end of 2 classes or the end of the week, whatever, to be able to share their knowledge and what they've learned formative assessment wise, or just turn and talk or whatever, so that you really can assess where they are in their learning and their knowledge, and they are able to share whatever they know instead of just saying, I can whatever. Yep, I got that. And then, moving on. So I love that idea of using more of the essential questions than just the learning target with the students.
What else? What else did you take away from this section on the infused classroom?
It was kind of a completely shocking statement for me, and I guess it's showing my own ignorance of the actual topic. But on 52, and it goes over to 53, it says, teachers may not know this, but when dominant culture stories are read as a class, there is a high likelihood that students of color can experience varying degrees of trauma. Am I the only person that was like, I did not realize that? I guess the book says we don't really know that, but I did not really know that. So I found that completely fascinating. And I wish I had known that sooner.
I saw that as well, and it kind of shocked me too. I try to kind of be mindful, but in my Spanish classes, I've been trying to use novels more because it kind of helps the kids kind of recognize words and comprehension and all. And so, it made me kind of rethink and like, okay, I need to really think about which ones I choose, and things like that. But yeah, that one really stuck out to me too, Kylie.
I like the statement wasn't just made, though. There's some resources there that were given to us that we can choose from. And I don't know if any of that's going to work in the second grade, but I do know that we've got a new curriculum coming through, and it just makes me want to be mindful of the things that I pull in to add to that.
I enjoyed how that section really talked about how we could use our Chromebooks to add additional stories and additional narratives to the conversation. And I teach history, so I really felt like it lent itself very well to my classroom. And I'm just thinking, first of the year, how can we pull in different point of views, which is an important historical skill set. But I like how with the use of this, we can go out there and find different narratives, and then just bringing it to our attention that we can be more sensitive. I've learned that other schools, they even do, like, for history specifically, they do like silent lessons when they're talking about some of those more sensitive topics, where just to be mindful and respectful of the content. And it was put out by the Holocaust Museum, so it's talking specifically about Holocaust stories, but just the room is silent while you're doing the gallery walk. And I was thinking how we could do that, and then maybe in the safety of their home, then they could do like a flip grid reflection on the gallery walk, just to kind of help with those more sensitive topics. So I enjoyed reading about the Tequity as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Rachel. That's something that's new to me, and in my experiences, like you brought up the Holocaust Museum, I had the opportunity several years ago to travel over to Europe, and I visited one of the concentration camps. And in part of the tour in the concentration camp, we were directed to be silent because of the magnitude of the events that took place there, because it is such a sensitive thing that happened. And so I love the idea of taking that idea, a silent lesson in a gallery walk, where students they're being immersed in what they're learning about, but because of the sensitivity of it or the controversial nature of it, it directs them to think and reflect on their on their own opinions and their own thoughts, without sharing those in a way that might come across as disrespectful or in a negative light that might, cause even more issues within the classroom, So I love that idea. And that's something that I'm going to do a little more searching and researching on my own. Thank you for that. So the 12 components of an infused classroom, how do you see those components working together to strengthen your teaching practices when there is so much incredible change that is taking place? Really, I guess since the beginning of COVID, it seems like there has change every single day. So how do you make use and think of these 12 different components and how they strengthen, how they can strengthen your practice in the classroom?
Well, I think one of them, like the differentiation. I know a lot of people struggle with how to differentiate for their classrooms, especially if you have a really wide range of learners and things. And I think the Chromebook just opens up so many more possibilities for differentiation. What you send to one student that other students don't necessarily see, products that they present to you can be, modified more easily. A multiple choice test, there's not much you can do to differentiate other than give them less questions. And I just think that's not really a great differentiation. But allowing for these different platforms and things that we can use on the Chromebook, there's so many opportunities for differentiation and for children to feel successful in the products that they're turning in and in their own learning.
And doing it in a way, too, that's not calling them out.
Right.
So often students feel like they are less because they're on a lower reading level or they don't get something as easily as other students. And so digital technology makes that so much easier to make them feel like they are not, lesser.
I'll go again. I had to laugh when I read number 6 that it said the students will embrace failure. I teach challenge students, and so they do not embrace failure at all. And when I read that, I just giggled to myself because I could see all of my students from last year and their faces when they don't get something perfect. And I just thought embracing failure is something that challenge students will really find a challenge this year.
That reminds me, Kelly, when I was in the classroom, kind of in that beginning of the school year, we would kind of have like this talk about failure. And I would just kind of start the year out by opening it up, and I would share failures with them that I had had in my life and what I had learned. And they were really surprised. And I think you kind of have to get to this point where you're just comfortable to talk about that. But I saw, and then kids started sharing out things like, well, I, didn't make the baseball team I wanted, or I didn't, and they started kind of sharing. And so thinking about like incorporating that type of thing or conversation into that beginning of the school year, establishing that culture, because really that, to me, that points back to culture. Now, I know with students who have gifted qualities, like I know they think failure is like the worst thing that ever happened to them. They just can't accept it. And a lot of them really don't know how to get through that. But maybe when we share our failures and they see us as the all-knowing, like that's just, they think we're the teacher, we know everything. You have to establish, hey, I don't know everything. But I think you as the person they view as knowing everything, when you share your failures, how powerful that can be for them. So.
And not just sharing your failures, but sharing how you coped with that failure, or how you tried again, or how you fixed it, or whatever the case may be, because they don't know how to deal with failure. They think, and I explain to them, I'm like, sure, I get mad at myself sometimes, but then I do this. And so it's okay to be mad that you failed to begin with, but then let's try something else. And I do that not just with my students in my classroom, but with my cheerleaders as well, because they expect certain things to work the first try, and it's not going to happen. It takes work, it takes progress. And so just teaching them how to actually deal with the failures is a big part of what I do also.
Callie said it's okay to get down. just don't unpack and live there.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love that.
I liked from the 12 components, I liked number 3. It was collaborative. Letting them work in pairs or groups or something like that. I challenge my students to find like YouTube videos that go along with the lesson that are more examples of math problems. I've given them several. The textbook has several, but sometimes somebody else actually verbally teaching it to them, it clicks, and it doesn't always have to come from me. So I challenge them to find YouTube videos and share those with our class also.
Something else that I kind of think of on that note with the collaborative aspect, a lot of times when we design instruction, the activities that we build are a lot of times geared more so for those extroverted students, like collaborative activities. They're intended to be, discussion type activities or activities that kind of make the room loud and noisy that don't really, cater, or I don't know, it doesn't go so well for the introverted students. It's it's overstimulating, so the collaborative nature that Chromebooks give us allows us to build and design activities that don't have to be noisy, loud discussions. It can be a collaborative activity where 2 kids are working across the room together on a document, a shared document or slide deck or something like that. It offers up that differentiation, gives students a different means to collaborate together that taps into their needs too. And so that spoke to me too. So kind of continuing on with that, which of these areas do you already see working and being utilized in your classroom? Where do you feel strongly about these 12 components?
I'm just curious, since we have a lot of secondary folks in here. Well, not everybody, but just from the secondary folks, the one about movement, just kind of getting up, moving around. Like, because I'm from the elementary world, I've really thoroughly enjoyed being immersed in the secondary world in this new role. But what are some of the ideas or ways that you guys may incorporate movement into your classroom? Or maybe that's a challenge. I don't know. I was just curious thinking about the secondary world.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say, from a science standpoint, one of the things that I do is a thing called, I get these off of Teachers Pay Teachers, or I make my own, but learning task cards, and you can set them up around the room and have the students move from task card to task card with a partner and work through the solution and discuss it. So it's collaborative and movement. Lab stations where they rotate from one station to another gets them moving around the classroom. And some of the activities require the students to get up and move, like they have to measure something or, manipulate the materials in such a way where they have to get up out of their seat. And so for science, anyway, that makes it quite easy.
Yeah, definitely.
I am naturally a big mover in the classroom. I'm constantly moving because I don't like to be still. So in my classroom, we do a lot of gallery walks. I'll even take them out to the hallway to get them moving around. One of my most successful lessons I had last year was an escape room, but to add a little bit more of a challenge to it, because it was a fairly simple escape room, is I gave the next level to someone in the classroom, and someone in the school, and they had to solve the riddle and then go find the next one. So I had groups of like 3 or 4 running around our school at one point. So they really enjoyed that. But also just offering different seating choices. I'm a real big, I don't like sitting in a desk. So offering those choices as well. And then doing station learning in the classroom where we would rotate through stations and different small group activities is what I've done.
Yeah, same. I've done the gallery walk with Spanish because they have to go and like conjugate different verbs and find the correct answer. If it's not right, they have to go to the next one. I've done scavenger hunts. I've taken them outside because especially like during all this testing and things like that, they kind of need a break. They need the fresh air. And some of those I've gotten from, Teachers Pay Teachers. Some of them I've gotten from different resources from Spanish teachers. I've gotten from Facebook and stuff. So yeah, and also with learning another language too, sometimes it helps do emotions or things like that in order to kind of remember vocabulary and and all of that. So
wow, I'm really impressed. That's super different than my secondary experience. I mean, I know that's been a long time ago, but that's awesome. That's incredible. I hope that that's the trend that we continue to see. Because I just remember like high school and middle school, like I sat in a desk and I didn't remember that as much from elementary school. And maybe we did that. I don't know. But I'm really impressed with the creativity. Thank y'all for sharing.
Ashley, and I'll echo on all those comments. In getting to be in different middle schools, I think it is a trend and it's exciting. Now, and they know this because they have counterparts across the hall. There are still those teachers that are not embracing movement like these guys are. But it is a slow building muscle that I see happening all across. And I think sometimes too, secondary, when they think of movement in the classroom, they think it has to be a gallery walk or it has to be a rotation of some kind where they're moving. All middle schoolers and high school, they just want to talk too. So movement can be as simple as just turning around and talking to the person behind you. So I think sometimes when you start talking to secondary about movement in their classrooms, they panic because they think it has to be some elaborate, organized activity. But if you guys can encourage your neighbors, just start small, I think they'll get hooked like you are.
Yes.
I will say movement is sometimes a challenge for me. I'm just barely 5 foot and I teach juniors and seniors who are just over 6 foot tall sometimes. So, and I have the smallest classroom in our building. I'm actually moving classrooms this summer though, but it's kind of nerve wracking when they're all up at one time and I can't see everybody because I'm on that lower level. But I have taken them outside before and we do sidewalk chalk and solve math problems and they have to take pictures and submit those kind of things. So they have a list of their problems. It's just, they could have done it on paper and pencil, but it gets us outside. We use the sidewalk chalk, that sort of thing. So it's just something fun for that day.
I love that idea.
That's awesome.
Working out a problem inside. Man, I wish I had that idea when I was in the classroom. They would have been all about working that problem out.
Any other areas where you feel like you were already doing and incorporating that component into your classroom? Okay. How about this last question here for you? So we've kind of touched a little bit on the literature and in the Tequity section about dominant cultures having an impact on students of color. So kind of in that same light, how can we use our devices, our Chromebooks, to support a more relevant and inclusive classroom that impacts all of our students, that last when they're learning? How can we use our devices to promote inclusion?
Well, as an ELA teacher, I think it's just really important in the literature that we choose and the text that we choose to present to the students. We have much more flexibility in what we choose than some of the other subjects and things like that. But I think if I'm teaching theme, I should really think about, which stories I'm using, and am I just using them because I've used them before? Am I just using them because they're classics, or am I using them because they really meet the needs of my students? So really thinking about how my students would feel about those characters, would they relate to these characters? Really choosing things that would include everyone in the room. I taught in Birmingham 25 years before I came to Shelby County. So this was you guys talking about not really realizing that that's something that we harped on so much in Birmingham City, because it's like our kids needed to see themselves in literature. And so I think that just really making sure that we make wise decisions, not just based on what we love. I've heard lots of ELA teachers say, well, I loved this book when I was a little kid, so I want to read it with my kids. Well, that might not be what your kids need or what they want to see in their classroom. So kind of going beyond ourselves and what we love, and really trying to include what our students would get the most out of and what they would enjoy and what they would be able to relate to.
I kind of like on page 55, giving us permission to use Howard Zinn and Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know. That really excited me. I know I have to be age appropriate, but those are two authors that I look to anyway. So
I actually got a little nervous when I read that I could use Howard Zinn, or that she recommended using Howard Zinn. It just made me a little like, I think I had to take a pause a moment when I read that, but adding those stories from marginalized groups is so important in all of our classes. And I teach at Calera, so I have a pretty diverse population in my classroom. And so I think I was aware of the issue, but I don't think I did a very good job of adding that inclusive. I'm sorry, that's the baby. Adding the inclusiveness into the classroom and into my lessons, especially. And I teach the first half of U.S. history. So when we, I think I need to do a better job of that. I think I struggled with that last year, and it's something that I want to be more aware of. And I've read Howard Zinn, so it's on my shelf at school. So maybe I will get some paragraphs out there and just look at that.
Yeah, to build on that, one of the things that struck me is that we have, like some of that I was thinking, oh my goodness, would this be seen as critical race theory in Alabama? Like some of it was just, because I teach science and I try to bring forward stories of marginalized scientists in history, like Percy Julian, who's actually from Alabama, who was the second African-American to earn a PhD in chemistry in the US, and was responsible for the synthesis of cortisone and all these other medications we use every day, but nobody knows who he is. And I know, like, especially in recent years, I'm trying to figure out how to word this without getting myself in trouble, but
it's a safe environment. You're good.
Some of my white students have just kind of, like, they just tune it out. And they don't see that as part of their history too. And, and I know that I teach science. I don't teach history. I don't teach ELA. And so I have to really kind of walk a line there with my standards. But I still feel like it's important for my students of color, my minority students, to see themselves represented in one way or another. And, and also for my white students to see, like, hey, there's been a lot of struggle that went up through the 20th century. Like, this isn't done. So anyway, but that was something that struck me there. Is like, it feels like walking a tightrope, basically.
Thank you for sharing, Elizabeth. That, I mean, what you said has so much truth, and yes. And it also shows the lack of exposure. Like when you said your white students feel the way that they do and that they're almost like tuning it out, I think that just shows the lack of exposure to individuals of color. And so it's definitely something we have to acknowledge and, and take into account when choosing literature and stories that we're going to share, videos we're going to share. All of that really matters.
You're right. We have to tread so carefully with it, in this day and age. The way that parents are, I mean, it's almost like anything related to race or minorities or historical events that involve, minority figures. It's almost like, parents are, so quick to jump to conclusions about what you're teaching. When, in reality, it doesn't have anything to do with critical race theory. So it's really tough. It's really tough to figure out how to provide those experiences without crossing the line that's not really a line. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a line further on down the road, but the line that, is not there, but parents feel that is, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. And I feel like some of my students feel that way too. Not all. I mean, not all. Let's be clear about that. But I do have some. There's eye rolling, and why do we have to learn about this and that kind of thing. And it's like, well, this is our history, and But thank you.
Thank you.
I will say one thing we can do to kind of help with that, and I feel bad that I didn't realize this because I'm an ELA teacher, but it talks about on 54 that background knowledge is a key indicator in reading success. And so it uses the example of a farm, right? You've got a kid reading about a farm, but they've never seen one. And so when you're introducing a historical whatever, or a new novel or a science concept or whatever, and you're giving background information to these students, you might have students who have literally never been exposed to that. And so their reading suffers, and their ability to communicate their knowledge on that suffers because they don't have the background knowledge, because they have no experience in it. And that goes for any race of student. I mean, depending on what you're talking about, go either way. And so we have to lay those foundations, and that's something we can use the technology for, is giving a wide variety of background knowledge to our kids to help set them up for success that way.
Yes, virtual field trips, there's so many things. I mean, that's just one example, but and that doesn't even have to take much time. But yes, things like that really wouldn't have been possible without technology. And so absolutely, that's such a great point, Kylie, building that background knowledge.
It's inclusivity. When we hear the word inclusiveness, we think of race, we think of ethnic differences, we think of gender differences even. But really and truly, I mean, inclusiveness is any difference, background knowledge, prior experiences, you name it. It can be anything. So, yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
I feel like that's something I use technology for quite a bit. There'll be some conversation I didn't realize my students didn't understand something, and we'll finish the lesson or bleed over into lunch that has been in the classroom this last year, and we'll just bring up those examples and explore that concept kind of in our extra time.
You got creative. I love that. Eating lunch in the classroom and using that time. That's a great idea. I think we'll move into our final question as we wrap up today's session. It's been such a great one. So Holly references in the book the quotes, or she says, students need to see themselves as people in control of their learning, not just passive receivers of information. And I think all of us in here agree with that statement, and we acknowledge that as being true. So, but really thinking about seeing that play out in your classroom, how does this statement shift your thinking on what students can do with technology? So how does their, they have obviously access to technology at their fingertips every single day. And so how does that allow them to now be in the center of their own learning and to be in control of that learning? What are your thoughts on that? Just to kind of rephrase that, let's think about the classroom we used to have without technology, those of us that have been teaching and we have not been in a one-to-one situation before. How did that look different as far as students not being just the, passive receivers of information?
I think now, even more than before, we have opportunities to really dive into what does differentiation look like. And I think that's going to lead to that active learning instead of the passive learning. If, and it's going to look different in every content and every grade level, but to really think about in our classrooms, the delivery of instruction, and is it one size fits all, or can we use that technology to make those learning experiences different yet meeting the same goals? So that's kind of where I start thinking about technology in this area.
Absolutely. I kind of think about like video creation and all of these platforms where students want to have the stage. I mean, I'm seeing that in my own child that's about to be 4. Like she's like, Mommy, video my show, and her show might be whatever she's learned about her. I mean, and that's just, I don't even know where that came from. That's just that's the generation we're dealing with, So I think about how they really are an active part of their learning when they're creating videos and they're sharing their learning in that capacity. And that really wasn't possible, before. Like I think about my classroom 10 years ago, and my kids weren't making videos. They weren't sharing their learning on that type of platform, but now they can. And so to me, that's a huge thing, is like their creation. They want to create everything.
I think about how learning now doesn't just have to happen in the classroom. For so long, kids came to school, all the learning happened there. We might have given some homework at home and then that was it. But, we've talked about different populations, from like our special ed population, our challenge population, kids that are out on quarantine. But kids now don't have to be in our room to collaborate with others on the assignment or the project that they're doing. They don't have to, always be in our classroom. If they have to be pulled out or for whatever, or if they are absent for long periods of time, that they can still continue their learning, they can still continue their understanding, they can still continue projects, working with others, all of that. So now, we see a lot of that in the flipped classroom as well, but it doesn't have to be happening within the 4 walls of our classroom, but it can happen at any time, 11 o'clock at night for our high schoolers, that kind of thing. So it opens up the more ways and means and doors for our students too.
And Tracy, I remember somebody at Ed Camp last week. We attended Mountain Brook's Ed Camp, several of us here. And I remember somebody, and maybe it wasn't a session anybody else was in with me, but there was a lady who was talking about how her son really succeeded during virtual learning because he now had stuff on record that he could listen to multiple times. And for him, that really catered to his learning style. He needed that repeated instruction. And so she said all of a sudden her son thrived in this environment where a lot of students were suffering because anyway, so it was just powerful to hear that, because again, that's another example of being able to learn from home, and it just caters to learning styles that were not catered to before. So
yes, I agree. I was thinking too about that learning styles when we were talking earlier about the building the background knowledge. And, you know, in the past, we might have flipped open a book and shown a picture or pulled something up really fast to show the whole class. But now to build that background learning, the door's wide open and the students have the Chromebook. And if they need that background knowledge to be built through a video, then there's the ways and means as well as a picture or an article on their reading level. So I think it helps, you know, like you said, with that part of it as well.
To piggyback off of that, that's what I was going to say is we've got this opportunity now to foster curiosity in a way that we haven't before. Like, we're not limited to a textbook and what we have in our library and our four walls. Like, this idea of, you know, I'm studying XYZ and then I'm like, oh, what's that? And then, oh, what's that? And that's a learned skill we have to teach them, of like encouraging them to go down these rabbit holes of like, you're interested in that? Great. Dig into it, research it, figure it out. And so that opens up a whole opportunity for us to grab onto those teachable moments with individual kids all during one class period, all at the same time. So that's exciting.
Any other thoughts before we start wrapping up?
Okay, well, it's 10 o'clock. If no one else has anything that they would like to share, it's been an amazing hour. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and we thank each of you for joining us today. So as we wrap up, just real quick, for what to do before our next meeting, which is on July the 12th. That's actually 3 weeks away, since the second week falls on that 4th of July week. So in your digital notebook, if you have not already clicked the update button that you see, that will put some new information into your slide deck for you. And on slide 9, you'll see the to-do list, so to speak, for the next session. And the first thing is a Flipgrid reflection. And so that Flipgrid, the words Flipgrid reflection are actually linked to the Flipgrid. So we want you to think back to the area that you pinpointed to focus on refreshing. That was on the Jamboard that you did. So you might need to revisit that Jamboard. The link is in your slide deck back on another slide. And on the Flipgrid, identify one delivery model of instruction that you will add or change. And that comes from those pages 58 and 59. And then identify one way that you plan to rethink students' role in learning. And that information comes from page 61 to 69. And so do that on the Flipgrid, and then also read from analog to digital, which is pages 70 to 101 in the book. And that's what we'll discuss and talk about when we meet back again on July the 12th. So, any questions? Any last words, thoughts? Okay, well, we really enjoyed our time together. Have a wonderful 4th of July holiday in the next few weeks, and we'll see you guys on the 12th.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Thank y'all. See you next time.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
Yes.